We're filming today for the Hamilton College Jazz Archive at Hamilton College, and I'm very pleased to finally be able to meet with my good friend Ray Shiner, who is a multi-instrumentalist, educator, and basically a source about many jazz folks, including himself. So I'm glad to finally get the chance to talk to you.
I'm glad to talk with someone who knows what he's talking about.
Well, we'll see if we can prove that.
We'll find out.
When you were a young boy in Pennsylvania, was there a point in your teen years or even before where you said, you know, I want to make a living as a musician? When did that happen for you?
When I was 6.
6. How come you knew so early?
No, I studied violin at a parochial school where the nun realized that I had some talent. So she arranged to have me excused from class 1 hour in the morning and 1 hour in the afternoon so I could go and practice.
Wow.
Of course, I didn't know why, you know, and she never allowed me to use the piano to tune the violin, but I found out later that it was because I had pitch recognition. But she started me on the road to thinking of being a musician.
Did you
and
stick?
it never left me.
Did you stick with the violin for very long?
No, well, I did up through college, but when I got to college, I got to the Eastman School in Rochester. I studied oboe and bass fiddle.
What a combination.
Well, I heard the oboe teacher there, and I said, I don't need violin anymore. I need the oboe.
But why the bass fiddle too?
Well, I was a violin major,
Yeah.
and because I have big paws, my violin teacher said, he said, you're never even going to make it on the bass, on the violin. I said, you'll make it on bass. He says, take up bass. So I took up the bass.
Well, it's a good instrument too, because it seems like they're always in demand.
Oh, I had a marvelous time playing bass and getting an instrument. And I've been a very fortunate musician.
Do you think playing the bass helped you as an overall musician because you're learning the foundations of the harmony and all that?
With absolutely no doubt. I gravitate toward the lower instruments. I'm a good baritone sax player. I play good bass clarinet. I gravitate toward the bass instruments because it's the root.
How did your parents feel about your choice of career?
They were in agreement because I had polio as a youngster. And it was a good thing to keep me occupied, keep me in the house and practicing and listening to music. And I think I'm one of the luckiest people in life to be a musician all my life. I earned a living playing. And I don't know too many people can say that.
That's right. Most people who say they play a lot also have other sources of income.
No, no.
You know.
I was a player. I'm still a player.
Yeah. When you went to Eastman, did you find any shock as far as the level of the other musicians there? Were you pretty much right up there with them?
No, no. I was shocked. I thought I was good until I got to Eastman.
Right.
Then I found out there's millions of good players in this country. But I did very well at Eastman. I was very fortunate.
Now, did they have a jazz, any involvement in jazz at all at that time?
It was unofficial. Jack End had a band. Jack was a clarinet teacher, and he played in the Rochester Philharmonic, which eventually I played in as an English horn and oboe player. Well, I was alto sax soloist with the orchestra at my first record date.
All right.
Which is very funny.
What was the piece?
A Latin American Symphonette by Morton Gould. And it was a duet between alto sax and oboe, my oboe teacher.
Oh, wow.
It's 1951. And I never forgot it.
That's neat.
No, I've been blessed.
Well, you obviously picked up a succession of instruments along the way.
Yeah.
And your own personal taste in music eventually turned to swing and jazz.
Yeah.
When did you, can you recall the first listening experience with either of those, with jazz, that registered on you?
Well, it's hard to pin down, except I remember specifically hearing Benny Goodman play Benny Rides Again, a new arrangement by Eddie Sauter, when I was in high school. And when I got the call in Rochester from a woman who identified herself as from the Willard Alexander Agency, it was really Kay Finnegan, Bill Finnegan's wife,
Oh,
and about auditioning for the Sauter-Finegan Orchestra. Of course, I was elated beyond expectation to hear that, because that's the greatest band that ever happened. And I started to rave about Eddie Sauter. Didn't say a word about Finnegan.
you didn't know you were talking to
Of course, I had remembered Benny Rides Again from 1939, which Eddie wrote for Benny Goodman.
Uh-huh.
And then when I auditioned for the band, I didn't believe it until I got to New York and saw who was there at the audition, that I was really auditioning for Sauter-Finegan.
Wow.
Then when Eddie called me 3 days later and he said, "We'd like to have you on the band," I started to cry.
Yeah. And you left school to go do that?
I was out of school by then.
Oh, you were? Okay.
Yeah.
That's good. And did you graduate with a teaching degree?
I got a teaching degree because my oboe teacher said it would never hurt my playing.
Oh, well, that's an astute comment. Right.
Of course, he was a solo oboist with the Rochester Philharmonic, and I was extra man with the Philharmonic.
Uh-huh.
He says, "It never hurt me to get my job here."
Yeah.
He says, "It's not going to hurt you."
Right.
Which really paid off. Years later, I called him up from New York. I says, "I've had it with this playing." I said, "Get me a teaching gig." He says, "There's an opening at Potsdam." So,
Oh, no kidding. That's interesting that connection
yeah.
so many years later.
Well, and
you
he
know.
was teaching at Potsdam
see.
summers.
Well,
He turned out to be one of my deepest, closest friends and the deepest influence.
Did you find playing classical music in an orchestra to be more or less stressful than playing jazz?
More stressful.
Can you elaborate on that? Because I tend to agree with you.
Classical music is a drag.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sticking my neck out, except I just enjoy jazz so much more. There's more freedom, and there's more interaction with other musicians, and you're listening. You have to listen just as well in a classical situation, but I found in a jazz situation, it's really it's a religion. It's a way of life. Which is the way I expressed myself to my jazz band at Potsdam, the kids in the band. I said, "This is not a gig for me. This is a religion. This is a way of life." Of course, I was vehement. I said, "If this can't be a way of life with you, you don't belong here."
Well, I've heard people describe it as an illness, that you can't get rid of it. But it certainly...
I don't care what you call it. I've been blessed.
Yeah. Did you ever have any difficult experiences with classical conductors?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
Many.
Well, name some. They're probably gone now.
I had one, which I've quoted. It was written up in the Rochester Jazz paper, where they did dances from West Side Story, which I premiered with the New York Philharmonic in New York.
Oh, funny.
And the conductor, it was a birthday present for Lenny Bernstein. I won't name the conductor, but he stopped to explain to me what jazz was. He's telling me what jazz was, and he's counting off 12/8 time, which is the way symphony musicians play dotted eighth and 16th.
Oh, right. Oh,
You know,
I see.
they play it like that, and I go boo, ba-doo, 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 which is the way you're supposed to play it. So after about 3 tries and encouragement from the guys in the orchestra, I was going to say guys in the band, the guys in the New York Philharmonic, friends of mine, they said, "Give it to him, Ray. Don't take that from him." Of course, that set me off because I said, "I don't need this from him." I said, "You want it the way it's written, the way you're singing it, or the way it should be played?"
All right.
So that kind of stopped the conversation.
Uh-huh.
And the guy accompanying me on that bit was the marimba player, who was an original member of the Sauter-Finegan Band, Walter Rosenberger.
Mm-hmm.
So Walter played the marimba, and I played the alto sax, and that was it. Brinstein came in a month later to record it.
Mm-hmm.
He just said, "Is my sax player here?" And I said, "Yeah, right here." Is my trumpet player here? Yeah. And Gino said, "He's here." So we were the two outside men from the New York Philharmonic.
Yeah. Okay, there you go.
So we did 2 fast takes, and nobody said a word. I don't know if that explains it.
Yeah, sure it does.
It takes up time.
It's interesting the way you describe the way classical musicians think of the swing eighth rhythm too.
Yeah.
With a 12/8 thing, they think of it as a triplet with the first note longer and the second note
Yeah.
shorter.
Which is wrong.
Which is wrong, but it's as close as they need to try to put it in a context that they can understand it. So it's as close as they can get it, I guess. Huh. So you did the ba-da-ba-da-ba.
That's right. That's at the beginning of the piece.
Right.
Well, anyway, that's
Neat. No, I like that story.
it's part of my life.
Yeah.
I played alto sax with the Rochester Philharmonic, the Chicago Orchestra, the New York Philharmonic. I'm a sax player.
Yeah, yeah. Well, listen, how did your name come up when they started to put the Sauter-Finegan Band together?
They were auditioning musicians in New York when they started the band, and they said, anybody know of any oboe doublers? And this one trombone player said, yeah, I know a guy up in Rochester. It was Eddie Irwin. Eddie played in the New York Philharmonic. He said, this guy, the doubles, he said, good doubler. He says, I don't call him a doubler, he plays good oboe.
Yeah.
So I didn't know it was through Ed that I got the audition until I got to the rehearsal. To the audition itself, which was a combination audition and rehearsal, and I saw Ed in the trombone section, and Jim Buffington, French horn player, was there. Everybody in town knew I was coming to town to audition, so they all showed up at the audition,
Oh, that's nice.
which was a nice feeling.
Yeah. What did the audition consist of? Just playing some of their charts?
Just sitting in and playing the charts.
Yeah.
And one number they played was Moonlight on the Ganges, and I missed every note. I was so nervous.
Oh.
It was so difficult. And 6 months later, after I had been on the band, I never figured out how I got on the band.
Yeah.
I said to Finnegan, I says, how come you picked me to play oboe in the band? I says, I missed every note on Ganges. He said, you played 2 good bars on When Hearts Are Young.
Oh.
He said, and the guys in the band wanted you. So,
Wow.
which was another thing.
Yeah.
That was a very unusual band. We were all, it's like a family.
Mm-hmm.
2 players in the band said, we want Shiner. That was it.
That's nice to have that support. Yeah. Was there any talk about, was this a good idea to try and be forming a big band now? Was it, what, 52?
Yeah, 52.
That those
53 was the first year we
Okay.
went on the road.
that the big band era,
Was going out then.
Yeah. And these guys wanted to do it anyway.
Yeah. They had the wrong booking agent,
Oh.
Willard Alexander, who was used to booking dance bands. We were not a dance band. We're a concert band. We're for listening. You could dance to us because Eddie and Bill wrote arrangements which were conducive to dancing. But it was very puzzling to the audience because the melody used to shift from one section to the next, or a different combination of instruments. We'd get to a gig and the people would yell up to the band saying, why don't you play something we can dance to?
Mm-hmm.
And Sonny Russo, my roommate in the band, would yell down, why don't you dance something we can play to? It was a very funny band.
Yeah.
We all had a great sense of humor, and we had 100% backing from the leaders.
Yeah. Did they play with the band also?
Well, Eddie loved to be, he was a frustrated percussion player.
Uh-huh.
And Finnegan just directed, well,
Yeah.
he was a great piano player.
Uh-huh.
They're both consummate musicians, and we adored them.
Mm-hmm.
Every night after the gig, we'd walk up to them and apologize for the mistake we made
Oh, really?
in the arrangements.
So what would a tour at that time consist of for you? Was it playing colleges or dance halls?
Was
or,
playing a lot of colleges.
Yeah.
Originally, we played every dance hall in the Eastern Circuit,
Mm-hmm.
which was a certain death. You know, people, they didn't understand our band or know what we were playing or know what we were doing, or they could care even less.
Mm-hmm. I'm trying to place the pop music that was going on in the early 50s, too. It wasn't quite rock
Well,
and roll yet.
they confused us with Ralph Flanagan, and that's probably the biggest insult you could give us, because Ralph Flanagan to us was the lowest. But some idiot at RCA confused the name Flanagan with Finnegan,
Oh, God.
and stuck with it, and insisted Ralph Flanagan was the band, because he thought it was Bill Finnegan. He had the names confused.
So he was promoting the group as a sound that didn't exist.
Yeah.
Wow.
And of course, we started out with 42 numbers in the library,
Uh-huh.
but every guy in the band, well, we all had different backgrounds. Some of us had strictly classical backgrounds, some both, and some jazz backgrounds. We had great jazz musicians in the band.
Mm-hmm.
And we used to fake, well, we'd play medleys, and fake medleys
Uh-huh. To get through the gig.
to get through the gig.
Right.
It was probably if you start me talking on it, I won't stop. It's the happiest days of my life.
That's okay. That's why we're here. I mean, can you tell me what you were making on that band?
I started making 100 and a quarter.
Uh-huh.
I got raised to 150. That was a lot of money.
Yeah, sure.
I didn't care if it paid 10 cents. I was a member of that. I still brag about it today. I was
Yeah.
a member of the original Sauter-Finegan Orchestra,
Uh-huh.
and I don't care about the money.
Right.
When none of us did.
Yeah.
We had world-famous jazz musicians. Mondell Lowe played guitar with us. Nick Travis played trumpet. Joe Ferrandi played trumpet. Sonny Russo played. You know, we had great musicians on that band.
Mm-hmm. And what label did you record?
RCA.
Yeah.
But toward the end, we recorded for United Artists, UA.
When you went into a recording session, how long did you usually get in the studio to do a record?
Usually, I don't know, you're supposed to do 3 or 4 numbers in 3 hours. Sometimes we do 5 or 6, and we'd be sight reading.
You'd be sight reading.
There's one number we did, the A&R man came out, he says, okay, he says, let's do another one. Finnegan says, no, we're not doing another one. He says, why not? He says, the guys in the band don't want to do another one. They like that one. He says, there's a couple of mistakes. Finnegan says, the hell with the mistakes. The feel was there.
Yeah.
And of course, we had our revenge. RCA wanted us to do something with kazoos because that was the rage.
Oh, God.
So Finnegan wrote something that Bob Merrill wrote. He's the guy that wrote Take Me Along for Jackie Gleason.
Oh.
Because he was a pop composer, you know. So Finnegan wrote Sunshine Girl, which was the name of the tune, for 21 kazoos. with the jazz kazoo, played by Sonny Russo and Nick Travis.
Did you record it?
Oh, we recorded it. One of the biggest hits we ever made. Strictly a put-on record.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I could tell you stories about that band.
Well, tell me stories about
No,
the
no.
band.
We played out in Hollywood. And on the Show of Shows, it was an hour-and-a-half coast-to-coast TV show. We were the house bands. And we did Moonlight on the Ganges, the number that almost killed my career in music when I auditioned for the band. But they came out and they put a turban on me, so I looked like a Hindu. And they put a turban on Eddie Sauter, and Eddie's conducting. And at the rehearsal, they had a string tied to an overhead teaser, and on the bottom of the string was a fake snake, and when I played Ganges, somebody would wiggle the string and you'd see the fake snake going like this. This is live television, 1954. So come the show, somebody untied the string and they're weaving this string, or they thought they untied the string, but they didn't. It was still tied to my music stand, and they start wiggling the snake in front of me, and a stagehand started pulling up the scenery, and my music stand went up, and I thought I was sinking, and I'm playing oboe like this. The string broke. The music came down and knocked over instruments. This is coast-to-coast television. Anyway.
That's a good one.
That's just one of the many stories that we had.
Did you guys have practical jokers in the band?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We had 21 musicians on the band and 21 practical jokers.
What was the
We
worst?
had 19 musicians and 2 leaders.
Yeah. What was the worst thing that you ever pulled? Can you recall?
Oh, that's hard to describe.
Yeah.
I can't describe that one.
You can, huh? How about the second worst?
Oh, the second worst one, I stood up to play a tenor sax solo on Manhattan. It was written for me, special arrangement. I had dear friends in the audience waiting to hear every note, and it was at a public dance, and they had balloons there, and as soon as I stood up to play the tenor sax solo, somebody started putting pins and popping balloons, which killed it.
Right, I guess. How did the band, did it struggle to stay alive from a financial standpoint?
Well, it got so bad at one point where the leaders took $25 a piece for themselves just to be able to pay the guys in the band.
Yeah.
And we didn't want that, so the band folded. We did just weekends. I left the band. I had left the band. A lot of guys have left the band.
Yeah.
And the band did a couple of weekends. And that was it. We lost $90,000 in the 50s.
Yeah.
That was a lot of money then.
Sure.
And the bill fell on Eddie to pay off, and Finegan.
One of them probably went to Europe, right? Was it?
Eddie went to Europe to conduct the Baden-Baden and the West German jazz bands. Took a couple of guys from the band with him, and including the harpist Blanche Birdsong went, and Sperry Karras went in percussion, and Dave Hildinger went on percussion and piano. And the bass player went.
And Finegan went west?
Finegan stayed where he was. Scuffled in New York.
Yeah. So in your tenure in that band, you played oboe and tenor sax,
English horn, flute, piccolo, clarinet. And if Nick Travis used to travel with the bass player, and the car got stuck on the road, I'd wind up playing bass with the band. What an experience.
Yeah. Well, you were a good guy to have around.
Well, I felt great being on that band. It was a privilege.
Yeah.
I'm the luckiest man in the world that I was a performing musician on that band.
So after that, 5 years? 4 or 5 years?
4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
Well, we did, it goes beyond that, because after the band broke up, we recorded in 57 and 59 and 61 and 65. And I made most of the records with the band. One album I didn't make. And one album I did half of it, but the last date was done by my replacement, so he got his name on the album.
Right.
I don't care about that. I know I was
You know
there.
you were there. You still listen to those records?
Once in a while.
Yeah.
Once in a while. I'm surprised they play it on the radio. About 3 months ago, they had a 40-hour retrospective on Eddie Sauter, and they played everything he ever wrote for the band in New York City.
Wow.
And a friend of mine recorded the whole thing and sent me tapes of the whole show, complete with stories.
Now, when did you get married?
1956.
So that was during that, or was that just
No,
about?
that was after.
That was after you got out?
That was immediately after.
Right.
I had left the band and I took a Broadway show. My wife was an assistant choreographer, and we went to Boston, and she liked Lebanese food, so the arranger was Hershey K. Hershey said, "Do you care if I bring a chick?" I said, "No." So he brought Dorothy, Shorty I called her.
Uh-huh.
She was the assistant choreographer. He brought her to the restaurant. She ate everything I ordered. I said, "That's the girl for me."
Oh, romantic.
No, I was the luckiest man. She's the most wonderful thing that ever happened to me.
Yeah.
And her daughter, Kristen, is the most wonderful thing that ever happened to us. So I'm blessed all the way around. As a musician and as a person, I can't complain.
So now you're a freelance musician
In Syracuse.
in Syracuse. Eventually you made the move to New York City.
Well,
I'm talking, okay, so I'm talking, what, 40, I'm sorry,
67,
60,
I moved to Potsdam to teach.
okay, but I want to talk about New York City a little more, if you don't
Sure, I love New
Yeah.
York City.
mind.
My favorite restaurants.
Yeah, as a freelance musician, what's the best way for you to, I'm talking in general, get your reputation out there?
I was lucky. I had a reputation before I got to New York. I had a reputation from the Sauter-Finegan Orchestra from the 50s. I was in New York from 48, but that was sporadically. I didn't settle in New York till 53, and that was with the Sauter-Finegan Orchestra. And my name had gotten around from playing with that band. Although I had played with other bands, well, I played with Ray McKinley's band after that. I played with Tito Puente, Tito Rodriguez, Sonny Dunham, a bunch of bands.
Yeah.
Some I only remember one, the Sauter-Finegan Orchestra.
Was the recording scene pretty healthy in the 50s once you got out and started to get into
It was
studio work?
once in a while. It was pretty steady at that particular time, but I had gotten to know some other people, Norm and Jimmy Layden, and I was doing a lot of jingles, which is not the greatest musically, but monetarily it sustained me. When I got married, I made $60 a week doing 2 television shows with Norm and Layden. 30 a week for each television show.
Wow.
But that was a lifesaver. Norm and Jimmy kept me going there for many years.
Yeah. Well, you told me earlier that your first apartment in New York cost
$17.50
a month.
a month.
Wow.
My second apartment cost $70 a month. And my third apartment cost $85 a month. When I left New York, it was $285 a month.
Yeah.
But I don't complain one bit.
Yeah. Well, tell me about working, studio dates. You would get a call to come, and they would specify what they wanted you to play.
Yep.
But you didn't really know what the music was going to
Didn't
be
know
like
anything until I got
until you
there.
got there. And then you'd read it down,
Sight read it.
sight read it.
That was the reputation you had to have before they'd call you to play a studio day. And if you didn't make it, the news would get around town that this guy bombed, and you wouldn't get called again.
Yeah, that's tough.
So each day was an audition. I was lucky. The musicians are very nice, and they're very thoughtful. They're very helpful. They would break their neck to help you. We had one date, I have to tell you this. The A&R man, usually he's from the advertising agency. And a lot of times they imagine that they are musicians. This guy thought he was a musician, and he yelled in. We had 5 saxes there. We were all playing flute. We were playing unison flute. You know what unison flute is?
Yeah.
We're all playing the same notes.
Yeah.
And this guy had to show that he knew something about music. So he hit the intercom button. He says, all right, guys, he says, we've got to straighten something out. He says, the third flute has a couple of bad notes at letter C. We're all playing unison, the same note. So I look at Phil, and he looks at me, and we both looked at Romeo, and these are the most famous doublers in New York City.
This is Romeo
Pankway and Phil Bodner.
Phil Bodner.
Now, you don't go any higher than that. And the 3 of us are looking at each other, and you say, what kind of an idiot do we have in the control room? Of course, I don't say this. Phil is the diplomat among the 3 of us.
Uh-huh.
He says, let me handle it. He says, give us a couple of minutes and we'll straighten it out. So he looks at me and he looks at Romy and he says, play the same notes. So we played the same notes, and the guy in the control room says, that's better.
Yeah.
So we took 20 minutes to do this, and we got 20 minutes overtime.
That's a good one. Can you
I
recall?
can tell these stories
Well,
now.
I like to hear them. I like to hear them.
Well, it's a long time ago.
You know, can you recall a session that was particularly memorable, either because it was really difficult and that you barely made it through it, or because it was so utterly ridiculous, like the story you just told me, that music-wise, maybe it was like really silly?
Well, there are a lot of silly dates,
Yeah,
but I don't think about those.
yeah.
I think about the hard ones, the ones where I just about made,
Mm-hmm.
and the ones where I may have made a mistake and wasn't too proud of it.
Yeah.
But there was one date we did the opening. I shouldn't tell this one. The introduction to April in Paris. And I thought that we were just fooling around, and they were setting up the mics for balance. I played a couple of wrong notes in the intro. I didn't know it until the record came out.
Oh.
But of course, you couldn't hear it unless you separated the channels and listened very carefully. I was personally embarrassed.
Yeah.
That's all. I've never told this story.
Yeah.
But there's a couple of wrong notes I played on.
Well, when you look at your career as a whole, I think a couple wrong notes.
Well, yeah.
I think we can live with that.
I'm starting to live with it now. So,
Yeah.
but,
I take it you were a perfectionist.
yeah, that's part of my undoing.
Yeah.
I was a perfectionist. My wife was a perfectionist.
Mm-hmm.
And some of it is rubbed off on my daughter, except we took pains to let her know that she doesn't have to do everything perfectly.
Ah,
And she's done very well.
yeah.
She's a published composer.
Mm-hmm.
She plays all the percussion instruments. She loves to play piano for fun. Her favorite thing is to sing. But I'm very proud of Kristen. So is her mother.
Yeah. And she's a good drummer.
She's a great drummer.
Yeah.
When Clark Terry, of course, my ambition when I moved to Syracuse, I said to my wife, I says, I'm going to get Clark to play with me in Syracuse. And it took a few years. Finally, I called Clark up and I said, I want you to play with the band. He says, okay, when? And he was very sick with diabetes.
Mm-hmm.
He got off the plane in a wheelchair. And brought him to the Civic Center in Syracuse, where he played with us, with the Central New York Jazz Band.
Yep.
And he absolutely killed the crowd, you know. Of course, he called Kristen to come up from the audience to sit in with us to play
Right.
drums. He says, we dedicate this one to Shorty. That's my wife.
Yeah.
And of course, I started to cry.
Yeah. That was a great event.
But
You guys did a good thing there with that orchestra.
we had a good time.
Yeah.
And the guys in the band killed me, though. Chrissy sat in, and she starts on the hi-hats. The guys in the band look up at me and said, why can't she play with us?
Oh.
Which was not really a compliment, but she did a nice job.
Yeah. Cool.
I wanted her to play because the concert before, Rob McConnell was our soloist
Mhm.
from the Boss Brass. And he had one arrangement on an old record of his that I loved. Every time we say goodbye, I said, hey, I want to do every time we say goodbye. He says, oh, that's old stuff. We don't do that anymore.
Oh.
So this was in November rather. And come Christmas, he said, he called me up on the phone, he said, you got a package in the mail coming, look for it. He found the score to Every Time We Say Goodbye and he sent it to me.
Ooh.
So I had Cal Custer was our pianist, and he was an ace computer man, and he took it off and copied the parts off in computer, and it had a vibes part, and I called Chrissy up, my daughter, I said, you're playing vibes on my next concert. Anyway, I'm waxing nostalgically here, but I've had a wonderful time in music.
Yeah. When you, was there a place that you musicians hung out in New York, waiting for
Yeah.
calls and so forth?
Well, there were several places. We hung out at Joe Harbor's Spotlight Cafe, or Junior's, or the Confucius Chinese restaurant. Of course, the bandbox was there at that time, and Basin Street was there, and Lester Young was still functioning, and so was Billie Holiday, and so was Benny Carter. You know, a lot of great famous musicians. Jack Teagarden. This is going back quite a few years.
What's this place, Jim and Andy's Bar?
Jim and Andy's was where all the musicians hung out.
Yeah.
Jim Coulevares was the owner of the bar. Jim used to loan money to any musician in town that needed it. His payphone was the hangout for every musician in town. The phone rang one day, and of course, whoever was closest to the phone would answer it. I answered the phone. I said, hello, is Nick Travis there? I said, yeah, just a minute. I said, hey, Nick, it's for you. Nick went to the phone, he picked it up, he says, yeah, this is Nick. And the voice at the other end says, Nick, this is Zoot. And Nick said, Zoot who? That's the kind of a place we hung out at. This was at 48th Street. This is down in the basement. Up on the sixth floor was the A&R Studios.
Oh.
Run by Phil Ramone, who's a famous A&R man today. He's a Barbra Streisand's A&R man or something. He was just another genius those days.
So people would call down there, you know.
People would call down there and say, we need a sax player, or we need a trombone player, we need a trumpet player, whatever they needed.
Mm-hmm.
Willie Rodriguez used to hang out there. A lot of great musicians used to hang out at Jim and Andy's.
And all this stuff was tied into the union, too, right? Would you get...
Loosely.
Loosely, okay.
Union was there because we had to belong to the union.
Yeah. And so when you went to do a date,
Of course, the union collected all the money, because we had to hand in contracts.
Right.
And they had to be approved by the union.
And then you had to go to the union office to get your pay, is that right?
Yes, I'd get in line. They had a recording line.
Mm-hmm.
People who did record dates, you go up to the date and you tell Julie your name, and he'd look in the list and he says, you got 3 checks, or you don't have any checks today. You know, so he would tell you, give you the checks and you pay your union tax, and that was it.
Yeah. What did it cost to belong to the local in the early 50s, do you recall?
I think it cost $52 for an initiation fee, and maybe $25 a year dues. It's much more than that now.
Yeah. And you had to, was there like a 6-month period or something?
I had a 6-month period in which I had to transfer. I transferred from the Rochester local, which was my home local.
Yeah.
Took 6 months, and you could do casuals, you could do single dates, which I did, and that sustained me while I was waiting for the 802. And when I got the 802, the New York Union card, and I could take a steady job.
I see.
And then I took a steady job and I paid $85 a week, which was nothing. I did the original three-penny opera down in the village with Lottie Lenya
Wow.
and B. Arthur. Oh, you should have seen who was on that in the cast. Leon Janney, some famous people. Jerry Stiller from Stiller and Mira.
Oh, yeah.
And Jerry Orbach was in the show. It was really, and B. Arthur. Some really famous names on Broadway. That was their first gig. We all did three-penny opera for scale. I have to tell you a funny that happened there. Charlie Russo was the other sax player, and we were in full view of the audience. And I played tenor sax and clarinet, and at one point there was a tenor sax solo in the dark. And I played the solo, and in the middle of the solo I let out a squeak that you wouldn't believe. Unintentionally, naturally, and the lights went on and my face is red, and Charlie Russo reaches in his pocket, full view of the audience. He puts a Band-Aid on my stand and he says, "Are you okay?" So, you know, a sense of humor sustains you.
I would say it has to.
So,
Who were some of the other of your most favorite fellow musicians that you associated with?
well, I would start off by saying the guys in the Sauter-Finegan Band. Any guy in that band, dear friends, cohort. Gene Allen played baritone, Wally Kane, Al Block, Harvey Eston. That's the reed section, Sonny Russo. I could go through the whole band. Joe Ferrandi, Nick Travis, Bobby Nichols. Tommy Mitchell. The whole list, the whole Sauter-Finegan Band.
Right.
But there are a lot of New York musicians. Clark Terry, Milton Hinton, Joe Saldo, Saul Gubin, Irby Green. Irby was soloist with the Sauter-Finegan Band on a couple of numbers we did. Irby was a very dear friend.
What was the racial atmosphere during your tenure in New York, as far as the studio work and playing in clubs and that kind of thing?
Black musicians had a hard time, like they still do, except today, not so much. But my closest friends were black musicians, and the biggest compliment that I've ever had was they consider me black. When Shorty, my wife, died, the Basie band played in town. Frank Foster's a dear friend of mine. And I know every guy in the band. My first date with Shorty, well, I took her to hear Basie. She said, "What are you taking me to hear Basie for?" I said, "Oh, they got to check you out."
Got to get their approval.
Oh, sure. Which was the truth. This is 38 years later, you know. Frank Foster, he says, "Where's Shorty?" I said, "She died last year."
Oh.
This was in Syracuse. So at intermission, he went out and he announced, he says, "We dedicate this concert to Ray Shiner and his wife, Shorty."
Wow.
He says, "Ray, this number is for Shorty." And they went into Little Darlin', and I cried for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
That's what they thought of me and my wife. They treated me as one of theirs.
Yeah.
So I'm very partial and very blessed.
Yeah.
When Clark Terry heard about Shorty, of course, he called up when she was sick. He spoke with her on the phone, and I said, "She can't talk to you." She answered him with one-word answers on the telephone.
Yeah.
And when Clark was here playing at the festival in October, he had the college send a limo to Syracuse to pick me up, to bring me here, to sit with his family, to hear the concert, to feed me lunch, and to take me back to Syracuse. Clark Terry did that for me,
Yeah.
because I'm one of the family.
Right.
And so is my wife, Shorty.
Well, I think it's interesting that the guys that rise to the top are also the nicest guys.
They are. They are. I feel blessed.
Yeah.
I feel doubly blessed knowing all the people. At one time I thought of moving to Hamilton. I was so happy here because everybody at Hamilton has treated me with so wonderfully.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody. I won't mention names because I'm afraid I missed somebody.
Yeah, right. Well, that's good to hear. Eventually, you decided to get out of the New York scene. Was it New York, or was it the music scene, really, or was it a combination of?
It was a combination. My daughter was 8, going towards 9 at the time, and I said, Chrissy keeps complaining that she has to yell up at me where we live to come down and get her. Because it wasn't safe, I guess. And, well, I was a typical Lebanese father.
Mm.
I'm very protective of my children, or my child. I said, enough of this. We have to take a cab to go to Brooklyn to go to the dentist. We have to take a cab uptown, and I don't want to get in the subway. At the time we went to a small town.
Yeah.
So I went to Potsdam.
Mm-hmm.
Not to put New York down. New York is still the greatest city in the world.
Sure. But you,
It's not the same today.
yeah.
If it were possible, you know. But every time a band came to Potsdam or to Syracuse or Watertown or any place near us, and Shorty and I would go to hear the band, she'd say, I expect you to get on the bus and take off with the rest of the band. It was usually the basing band,
Yeah.
and the guy would say, Shiner, you're late, get on the bus. She says, I wouldn't be surprised if you got on the bus.
Why did you have such a close association with the Basie band?
It was always my favorite band.
Uh-huh.
It was the Sauter-Finegan favorite band.
Yeah.
We had a night off in Wichita, and we all conned Joe Gray, our bus driver, to take us to hear Count Basie. The whole Sauter-Finegan band went to hear Count Basie. No, that was our favorite band. That was our idea of a jazz band.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Do you like what's happened with the band since the Count passed on?
They've kept the tradition.
Yeah.
They've played a few new things here and there, but they play a lot of the old things.
Yeah.
And Frank Foster had the band for a time.
Yeah.
Grover Mitchell has the band now, I think. Freddie Green, the guitar player, had the band for a while.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
He
Freddie.
doesn't seem like the leader type, but
No,
Never knew that much about
Freddie's
him.
Freddie's not the leader type, but he was.
uh-huh.
The guys in the band respected him.
And Thad Jones too for
Thad Jones was the leader for the band.
right.
I hate to forget names, but
Right.
there's people I associate with. Something humorous personally to me was when Freddie Green had the band, and I went at intermission. I went up to Freddie and I says, "Freddie, I want you to meet Mike Scott." I said, "I got 3 of them in the band," meaning 3 brothers.
Oh.
There are 3 black cats I had in the bands.
Mm-hmm.
Freddie thought I meant I had 3 black cats in the bands, and that I was trying to be
Trying to be hip.
trying to be hip, you know. And I got a look from him that I don't believe. I saw Clark Terry 2 weeks later. I says, "How well do you know Freddie Green?" He says, "Very well." I says, "Will you go to Freddie and explain to him who the hell I am
Right.
and what I meant by that remark?"
Yeah.
I told him what I had said and Freddie's reaction. I says, "I was never so embarrassed in my life." Anyway, that's,
I bet Clark got a kick out of it.
oh yeah.
How did you adapt to life in small town Potsdam?
Very difficult.
Yeah.
No, I loved my oboe students, and I adored my jazz band, the guys in my band, because of that. This is, that's 1967. This is 1999, 98. This is 30 years later. I'm still in touch with them by telephone or by mail
Mm-hmm.
of guys in my band. It's still my band.
Mm.
And they treat me like I'm still their leader. It's a family.
Yeah.
But that's as a result of mine being on the Sauter-Finegan Band, because Sauter-Finegan Band is still the same band, and we're still members of the same family. And if you're a member of Shiner's band, you're still a member of his band.
Did the college music department support
No.
the jazz?
They did to a certain extent. I shouldn't talk about Potsdam like that, but
Yeah.
they had their shortcomings.
Well, you know, jazz education was not even hardly a term then, right?
My band, after the second year, was invited to play the National MENC, Music Educators National Conference in Washington, D.C. And the powers that be at Potsdam said, no, it would be bad for the name of the college to have jazz associated with Potsdam. And the leader of the wind ensemble was invited to play in Washington, and he called me up. He says, Ray, he says, I arranged it so you wouldn't get noise from the front office. He says, every guy in your band is in the wind ensemble, so they can't give you any noise about transporting them to Washington. Oh. So I told him this fact, and it didn't faze him one bit. So I gave up the band for a couple of years, but then I says, I can't do that.
Yeah, right.
But I don't put Potsdam away. They gave me a lot of encouragement.
Yeah.
One year of course, I've been a radical all my life, as you may have gathered by now. But one year they had a new auditorium up there where the reverb was 6 seconds or something like that. If you played something 6 seconds later, you'd hear it played back.
Yeah.
I refused to play a concert in Hosmer Hall. I said, no, I don't play there. Where will you play? I says, College Theater. Well, you can't play there. Nobody plays there. I says, I play there. Well, you know you can't do that. I says, well, then cancel the concert. Which is kind of nervy. The guy looked at me, he said, you got to go through me to play the concert. He said, you're canceling? I said, yeah. Tell the dean I'm canceling the concert. So he went to the dean. He said, Shiner just said he's canceling the concert. He said, what's the matter? He says, he wants to play College Theater. He says, give him the College Theater.
I know what you're saying. Some of those auditoriums are not built for those kind of things.
Anyway, I got the College Theater, and of course I have close contact with the College Theater. All the people on the stage crew, the head of the drama department, they're all friends of mine because I like art. I appreciate the finer things in life. And my wife and I supported them, so they supported me. I don't know if that has any relationship to what you want to hear. So.
You turned out, had some students that went on to become pretty well known.
Pretty big.
Was it Renee Fleming? Is she
Renee Fleming is a world-famous vocal soloist at the Met.
Yeah.
She sang with my band. Her first gig singing. No, she sang in beer joints in Potsdam. But singing with a band, she sang with my band.
Interesting.
Glenn Drews, Gary Keller, Gary Burke, Bruce Petrucci, a lot of well-known musicians. Mike DeMeo.
What made you come to Syracuse after that?
Joe Carello.
Well, that's a compliment.
I said, Joey, I'm retiring. He says, come to Syracuse, I'll get you a band.
Yeah.
He knew that was the first thing in my life.
Right.
He says, my old man, my father will get you a house and you get a big enough yard for Shorty to have a garden. He said, so you got it made. So he did. My first year, Shorty had her garden, and I had my band.
And you were playing, I know I've seen you out on gigs playing bass and different things.
Yeah, I've had a good time in Syracuse.
Yeah.
I'm a Syracusan as far as they're concerned.
Right.
Even though I have home roots in Rochester. I have a brother and a sister and nieces and nephews and friends. my daughter and son-in-law in Rochester.
Do you have an opinion about the state of jazz today?
It's in decay. It's pop and rock, not even pop, it's rock and roll. It's not even rock and roll, it's, I don't know what you call it because I don't listen to it.
Mm.
It's sickening, it's noise. Noise is the way I describe it.
Uh-huh.
But of course, I'm an old reprobate.
What about fellows like Warren Vacher or Scott Hamilton?
Well, they're great players.
Yeah.
No. Those are great players. I love Dixieland. You know, you have Dixieland here. You have traditional music here. You have some of the greatest jazz musicians in the world play here at Hamilton.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have Warren Vacher, you have Kenny DeVerne, and you have, name them.
Yeah. So there's
Ralph Sutton.
Yeah. So it's still happening, I guess, but it's an awful small.
You got Joe Wilder
market.
here.
Yeah.
You had Clark Terry here, which was what brought me here. You had Milt Hinton, which was what brought me here.
We had Frank Foster here.
You had Frank Foster here. These are all dear friends of mine.
Uh-huh.
Had Bobby Rosengarten. I worked with him when he was at ABC. He was the musical director for Dick Cavett. I had a great life in New York, and these guys have never forgotten me, and I've never forgotten them.
Yeah. Well, that is a good story. You know, your life's a good story.
Well, I've been very fortunate and blessed.
Mm-hmm.
I got to meet you. I'm not trying to throw bouquets at you, but you know what I'm talking about. I don't have to draw a picture for you.
Yeah. If there's one part of your life that you could have sustained longer, would it have been the Sauter-Finegan Band?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Notice how long it took me to answer that.
Notice I didn't even have to ask the question.
The only other thing is I wish my wife were here
Yeah,
to enjoy this,
of course.
because she'd grin a mile wide hearing me talk like this.
Right.
And we're both so proud of our daughter, Chrissy.
Yeah.
We've been blessed.
Uh-huh. Well, it's great that you have documentation of that period of your life.
Well, it's
You know.
something I can't forget, don't want to forget, and I'm lucky to have known.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, you know, there's now, with so many cable channels, they have the TV Land station, and they have these, they call them retro commercials. They're showing some of the old commercials from.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you'll ever hear yourself.
No, well, I'll tell you what I will see is probably my wife dancing. She did one of the first Stop-Et commercials, just a dialogue, no music, just talk.
For which?
Stop-Et, which is original. See, you're young. It's an original deodorant. Stop-Et was one of the original deodorants.
I'll be darned. And she was doing this.
Dorothy Jarnack was her professional name.
I'll be darned.
And she would come out, and the announcer would go through this copy, and she would do the copy by walking. She was on Peter Lind Hayes' show. She was on many shows. She was on Concert Stage.
Mm-hmm. Wouldn't that be something to see that?
Oh, I wish they had videos of my wife dancing.
Hmm.
Well, she was in a movie. She did Lily. She was the blonde puppet
Oh.
in the movie Lily.
Uh-huh.
And she was in several Broadway shows. Well, the Bloomer Girl brought her to New York. She did Tickets, Please. And, she was a world-famous dancer. She was in Life magazine twice.
Well, it's no wonder you two were attracted to each other. Being into art and
We were cursed.
Lebanese food.
Lebanese food, which is what did it.
Yeah.
Which is kills me. I'm Lebanese, and my wife was a mixture of Irish, German, English, Spanish, a little French, everything. But she liked Lebanese food.
Yeah. I neglected to ask you about your own parents.
My own
Did
parents?
they come here from?
They were here. Their parents came from Lebanon,
Uh-huh.
And of course, they came from a small town named Hardin, which no one ever heard of until I got to Syracuse. I met a doctor who had treated my wife when she was getting evaluated for cancer. Of course, she was just getting evaluated at the time. He says, oh yeah, he says, I've heard of Hardin. He says, I've been there. He says, your wife's not Lebanese. He says, you are. He says, I hear you speak the language. I says, I only know the names of the food. I says, I don't speak the language. He says, well, you mentioned that in one word. He says, it's not. He says, you're from Hardin. He says, they're the only people that pronounce it that way.
Yeah.
So,
Well, it's really been fascinating talking to you.
it's been enjoyable talking with you. I get to talk about things that are important to me.
Yeah. And I know that we'll be seeing you here at Fall Coming.
Oh yeah, I never miss coming
Great
here.
musicians.
This is I've often thought of moving to Hamilton or moving to Clinton. But, it's just overwhelmingly physically difficult to move.
Yeah. Right.
I have tapes, records, cassettes, hi-fi systems, instruments, a Steinway piano. I have everything.
Mm-hmm.
It's overwhelming just thinking about moving.
Right.
I have original Sauter-Finegan tapes when we did the Camel Caravan with the field, pardon the expression, Vaughn Monroe.
Oh. These were live.
Live.
Yeah.
Live shows. Oh, I've been very lucky.
All right.
I've had a wonderful life.
Well, it sounds like a good place for us to wrap up.
Yeah,
And
thank you for asking me. I'm flattered
it's been my pleasure.
and happy to be here.
All right. Thank you.